The sun was setting over the glistening waves, casting gold across the deck of the luxury yacht. Laughter echoed through the warm ocean breeze, sharp, smug, and just loud enough to make her feel out of place. Dressed in a simple linen dress and sandals, Ava stood at the edge, quietly watching the sea. Around her, the other guests sipped expensive champagne and exchanged flashy stories of wealth and influence. To them, she was just someone's plus one. Maybe the assistant. Maybe someone who wandered onto the wrong boat, but definitely not someone who belonged. They rolled their eyes when she asked simple questions about the boat. They whispered when she walked past. One woman even smirked and offered her a tray of hors d'oeuvres, mistaking her for the staff. Ava didn't react. She just smiled, calm, graceful, and unfazed. There was something in her eyes they missed completely. A quiet confidence. A strength that didn't need to be loud. Not yet. As the night rolled on, the teasing grew bolder. A joke here, a snide comment there, all while Ava remained quiet. She didn't need to defend herself, because she knew something they didn't. This wasn't just any yacht, and she wasn't just any woman. What they didn't know was that Ava wasn't visiting the yacht. She owned it. In fact, she owned all of them, every vessel in the fleet lined up across the marina. The truth was just one phone call away from being revealed, but she was waiting for the perfect moment to let it all unfold. And when it did, everything changed. So, what happened next? How did they find out? And what was Ava's story before she ever stepped onto that yacht? Stay tuned. Ava wasn't born into this world of oceanfront galas and multi-million-dollar yachts. Her story began far from the glossy magazines and flashing cameras, on a quiet street in a small coastal town where dreams felt too big for the map. Her father was a fisherman. Her mother ran a tiny cafe that barely stayed open through the winters. Money was tight, but there was always love, and a window that looked out to the sea. That view stayed with her. Even as a teenager, Ava would sit by the docks and watch the boats glide by, imagining stories of the people aboard. She'd wonder what it would feel like to have the wind in her hair and the world at her feet. But it wasn't just a dream, it was a goal. She studied hard, worked night shifts, took risks most wouldn't. And when her first startup failed, she built another. Then another. People laughed then too. They called her unrealistic, too ambitious, too quiet to lead. But Ava had learned something early on. Power doesn't always make noise. Back on the yacht, the chatter continued. The guests were now swapping stories of famous people they knew, deals they claimed to have closed, and yachts they claimed to almost buy. One man made a point to correct Ava when she asked about the engine specs. Another woman leaned in, laughing. "Sweetheart, maybe boats just aren't your thing." Ava just smiled again, her fingers lightly resting on her phone. One message. That's all it would take to have the crew address her by name, to bring the captain over with a respectful nod, to silence every whisper. But not yet. She was still watching, still waiting. Because sometimes the best part of owning everything is letting people assume you have nothing. As the night deepened, the yacht buzzed with energy. Music pulsed softly from hidden speakers, and laughter spilled across the deck like spilled champagne. But under the sparkle and chatter, there was a current of tension building, one no one else seemed to notice. Ava moved through the crowd with quiet ease, but her eyes were sharp, catching every sideways glance, every hushed joke passed behind flutes of champagne. There was one man in particular, Daniel. Tall, confident, with that smug charm that came too easily to people who never had to earn it. He'd been circling her all evening, offering fake politeness wrapped in subtle insults. At first, it was light teasing. Then it turned sharper. "So, who brought you here?" he asked with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You look a little lost." Others laughed politely, not wanting to be left out. Ava smiled back. She was used to men like him, people who only respected power when it was loud and obvious. What Daniel didn't know was that he'd once applied for funding from a venture firm Ava quietly owned. His pitch had been rejected, twice. And now here he was, unknowingly mocking the very woman who could have changed his future. Meanwhile, another subplot quietly stirred on the lower deck. Two crew members, whispering near the supply hatch, had begun to suspect who Ava really was. One of them had worked her last event, the annual fleet summit, where she'd given a private speech to investors and captains. He recognized her, but wasn't sure. Should he say something? Or wait? Upstairs, Daniel raised his glass again, this time for a toast. To success, and knowing your place. He chuckled. Everyone laughed again, except Ava. She simply nodded and waited, because the reveal was coming, just not yet. The air was getting heavier now. The party hadn't slowed, but something had shifted. Ava could feel it in the way people moved, slightly more aware of her, a few more glances thrown her way. Someone had started to wonder. Maybe it was the way the crew avoided correcting her, or how the bartender, without being asked, had served her a drink only regular VIPs ever ordered. Details that didn't fit the picture they had in their heads. Daniel was still holding court, his voice louder now, feeding off the attention. The thing about wealth, he said, swirling his glass, is that you either have it, or you pretend to. His eyes flicked to Ava for just a second. The message was clear. The crowd laughed again, though more hesitantly this time. Some of them were starting to feel uncomfortable. Not everyone was enjoying the joke anymore. Below deck, the two crew members were still whispering. One of them had pulled up a photo on his phone, grainy, from a business magazine feature. Ava, dressed in a tailored suit, standing in front of the very same fleet. The caption read, *Ava Monroe, founder of Blue Crest Marine *. Now it was clear. And now it was a question of who would speak first. Back on the top deck, a call came in to the captain. He picked up, listened, then stood a little straighter. Something in his face changed. His eyes moved across the crowd until they settled on Ava. A quiet nod. No announcement, just a signal. She saw it and knew the moment was near. The yacht began to shift course slightly, guided by a silent instruction from the helm. Lights from the nearby marina reflected on the water, and in the distance, the rest of the fleet was waiting. But no one else knew, not yet. The breeze picked up as the yacht turned, drawing closer to the marina. The soft hum of engines barely registered over the music, but Ava noticed. She watched as one by one the silhouettes of the other yachts came into view, sleek, towering, and motionless in the still water. Each one lit just enough to reflect power without showing off. Her fleet, her legacy. Yet still, she hadn't said a word. Just as the energy on deck began to shift, another unexpected figure stepped aboard. Clara. Sharp suit, crisp steps, eyes like steel. She was Ava's former business partner, the only person who ever came close to matching her vision. They had built the company together, until they didn't. Their split had been private, clean, and full of silence. But seeing her here, unannounced, was like watching a ghost walk through a locked door. Ava's heart skipped, but only for a second. Clara scanned the deck quickly. She wasn't here to mingle. She was here for Ava. Daniel, still on his soapbox, spotted Clara and mistook her for another investor. Now that is someone with taste, he said with a chuckle. You can tell just by the way she walks. Clara didn't even glance at him. She moved straight to Ava, leaned in close, and whispered something only she could hear. Ava's jaw tensed, her fingers curling around the edge of her glass. There was news, and not the kind that could wait. Something was happening back on shore, something that could shift everything. A hostile acquisition attempt, someone trying to claim part of the fleet, a name from Ava's past rising up again. The celebration had turned into a chessboard, and Ava was no longer just waiting for the perfect moment to reveal who she was. She now had to decide who she could still trust. Ava stepped away from the crowd, her heels clicking softly against the polished deck as she followed Clara toward the bow. The yachts in the marina were now fully visible, glowing against the night like a silent army. Her fleet, each one registered under Blue Crest Marine, each one built from scratch. And now someone was trying to take it from her. Clara handed over a tablet. On the screen was a legal filing, rushed, aggressive, and backed by a name Ava hadn't heard in years, Marcus Layton. A former investor with a personal vendetta, once pushed out of the company after trying to redirect control behind closed doors. Now he was back, using a shell corporation to try and claim a stake in 3 of the largest vessels. The timing wasn't an accident. Tonight wasn't just about mocking Ava, it was a setup. She took a breath, then turned back toward the party. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ava said calmly, stepping into the center of the deck. The crowd turned, a bit confused. "I'd like to welcome you all. Not as a guest." She smiled, pausing just long enough for silence to settle. "But as your host." Murmurs erupted. Daniel froze mid-sip, his eyes wide. "I'm Ava Munro, founder and CEO of Blue Crest Marine," she continued. "You've been enjoying your evening aboard my yacht. And in case you were wondering," she gestured toward the marina, "those are mine too." The silence was thick, shock, embarrassment, awe. Then came the twist. She turned to Clara. "And I'd like to introduce our new Chief of Operations, Clara Monroe." A stunned beat. "She's not just my former partner," Ava said. "She's my sister." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel stepped back, speechless. The game was never about proving she belonged. It was always about reminding them who built the board. The mood shifted completely. The laughter had vanished, replaced by stunned silence and humbled expressions. Daniel, now pale and visibly rattled, slipped quietly into the background. He didn't speak again that night. Around him, the guests began to realize just how wrong they'd been, not just about Ava, but about what real power looked like. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy. It moved in silence, behind calm smiles and quiet confidence. Ava and Clara stood side by side now, both calm, both in control. Whatever tension had once existed between them had been replaced by something stronger, respect, and maybe even forgiveness. The attempted takeover had failed before it even started. Clara had caught it in time, and together, they shut it down before it reached the boardroom. Just like they used to, smart, fast, and always 2 steps ahead. As the yacht slowed to a gentle stop near the marina, the crew stood a little taller, now fully aware that their true boss was on deck. One by one, lights from other yachts flickered on in quiet salute, captains acknowledging the woman who built the empire they sail for. Eva took a final look at the water, the skyline, and the people now whispering her name with something closer to admiration. She didn't need to embarrass anyone. She didn't need revenge. The truth had spoken for itself. The guests began to depart, some shaken, others inspired. A few stayed back just to say thank you. The story would spread fast. The woman they mocked on the yacht was actually the owner of the entire fleet. And as Ava walked toward the helm, taking her place at the front of her world, one thing was clear. They'd never forget the night they underestimated her. And they'd never do it again.